Welcome everybody. I thought, how am I going to stand out? So I went, luckily I was able to pick out my pink suit, having had Barbie been and gone over the last couple of months. So very happy to be here, very happy to be chairing this session. And I'm really looking forward to it. We've been made to wait because everybody's been having their bags checked behind. And Tom was saying, oh, it says hard hats. Wear your hard hat behind in the green room. And I'm like, I'm sure it's going to be fine. No fisticuffs today. I have a feeling, actually, that there's going to be a lot of very kind of similar, but I hope very positive outcomes of this morning's session, rather than everybody leading with their fists. And I just wanted to kind of make a quick reflection, because on Monday I attended the first symposium of the Quality of Life Foundation, a charity that we set up in 2019, on the premise that having a decent, affordable home in a safe, well-designed neighbourhood is the foundation of a happy, healthy life. I mention this not just because I want to give a quick plug to an amazing organisation, but because one of the challenges that came from a healthcare professional in the audience that I found really I've been reflecting on ever since. She said, as a doctor, she signed up to a Hippocratic oath. I've now then written it, and I can't possibly begin to say it properly, but it says, first, do no harm. So a Hippocratic oath that says, first, do no harm before doing good. And I'm sure you all know, lies at the core of all medical training. And her question was simply, why as an industry do we not have something similar? And as I said, I've been thinking a great deal about that, because as someone, I think, who through practice and profession has always tried to do exactly that, to add to the quality of life as opposed to harming it. And I'm thinking, surely that's what drives all of us. Surely everybody attending this forum today wants to do exactly that. And I think for those of us who are interested in how we add value while still balancing the enormous headwinds, maybe I should say gale force winds, is it Agnes that's coming our way, of a country which is struggling with a kind of national race to net zero, an associated energy transition, a countrywide ongoing housing challenge, a challenge of development funding and delivery, and of course the challenge to build an urban environment that truly reflects the changing demographics of our world. To say that value means different things to different players is, I think, probably to state the obvious. But whatever your own definition of value is, I think we all now expect and accept that it goes way beyond its traditional association with financial return. Value is about creating balance, where anything that promotes excellence does not do so at the extreme detriment of anything else. The first principle of doing no harm. So what are the key? How do we then look at how that balance works? How do we ensure that economic benefit can be met equally with environmental harmony? How can societal excellence be met with social equality? How can our built environment and our built and progress be caveated by decarbonisation and circularity? And how can our built environment work best in servicing the well-being and the quality of our lives? We have so much to do in shaping this new understanding of value. Today's forum is about addressing these challenges and finding solutions. No pressure. But ahead of then, we have an amazing, amazing panel to set the context. The State of the Market is an opening discussion that aims to give us the background understanding we need to get out of the most out of today. What are the big picture trends, key policy challenges, the opportunities for growth across different sectors? How will the economy impact the built environment industry in the coming year? What solutions are being considered to help mitigate this economic shift? To answer those questions and more, and hopefully, I have to say, you also in the audience with Slido. So please get your questions ready. #LREF23. Please make sure that you are sending those questions forward to us. We are really going to be looking forward to those questions, but I obviously have some ahead of that. I'm going to introduce my incredible audience. I was going to introduce all of my incredible audience. I'm going to introduce my incredible panel. Alexander Jan, if you could just say Alexander. Yeah, because of course we somehow have gone out of sync. Chief Economic Advisor, London Property Alliance, and non-executive chair of the Central District Alliance, Caroline Taylor, Project Director, Infrastructure and Projects Authority to the HM Treasury and the Cabinet Office. We have Becca Heron, Strategic Director, Growth and Development, who is standing in for Councillor Beverly Craig. I have to say, Becca is my favourite ever stand-in, so I'm really, really happy that you're here today. Tom Goodall, Managing Director of Related Argent, Tom, and Rajesh Agrawal, Deputy Mayor of Business for London, last but not least. So can we just have a quick round of applause before we start? Alex.
Sadie.
You know you have the first question, and you've promised me you're going to be upbeat. So let's see.
Well, like others, my promise is sort of blow hot and cold with the political times. Do you want to ask me anything or just talk?
No, I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you, Alex, what the current real estate performance trends and how is London performing on the international stage? I mean, I think super important. How are we? How are we doing, Alex?
Well, Tom's probably more qualified than I am to answer this question because he's in sort of the coalface of this through Related Argent. But I guess that were any of you at the Movers and Shakers event last week, by the way? Okay, so apologies because I'm going to reuse, in the interest of sustainability, some of the reflections I had then. I guess comparatively speaking, if we look at some of the key indicators of how the London real estate market, particularly central London, has performed, and London Property Alliance does this excellent global city survey every quarter with data provided by Centre for London. We've kind of performed pretty well compared to our peers. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we look at vacancy rates, for example, although our vacancy rates are higher than Paris and Berlin, they're much lower than Manhattan. Tom and I were talking about why this might be. Manhattan's vacancy rate is 22%. Central London's is probably about 6%, and obviously there's variation in that mix. And it's not far off where it was actually pre-COVID. On prime rental values, West End has shown very robust performance for new prime letting, sort of 10% increase in values. City's a bit behind that, I think, sort of lower 10 digits, 5-6%. And again, that's better performance than we've seen in New York and elsewhere. Paris and Olympic Games and all that is in a pretty robust position. Hong Kong is still struggling coming out of its late COVID lockdowns and all the rest of it. But you will have seen in the press this week BNP analysis of valuations and a sort of double-digit fall in central London office values, 17-18%. And I guess that the BNP, who are optimists, have said this is going to provide a unique opportunity for people to get into rare assets in London. There's a window of about a year to come and invest. And also they say that they've seen faster adjustments here than they have in other European cities. I think interestingly, Manhattan and New York economy, which does tend to adjust more quickly than ours, has probably fallen further and faster. And London, classic mid-Atlantic economy, is in the middle of the pack. So I think overall we've done okay. I think certainly certain parts of the market will suffer more than others. Where we're seeing, and you will have heard this 1,000 times, but where we're seeing excellent new buildings with high environmental credentials designed around the way in which people say they want to work, playrooms and slides and beanbags and all the rest of it, those buildings are also doing well. And indeed in little patch, between Topcourt Road and Farringdon here, we've seen some fantastic new buildings, the Evershow building, the Dar building, the Post building, which are kind of responding to those needs. So I think at the moment, London real estate market, office market, central London's doing well. There are buts to that, but you wanted me to remain optimistic, so I will be quiet for now.
Fantastic, thank you. I don't know, there's a kind of, I'm not sure it feels like that. I mean, and I hate to be the one putting a downer, but it's like you're saying, actually, in relation to, all of our international peers, we're doing pretty well. But how do we kind of encourage it? I mean, maybe we'll hear about that in the end. But how is London going to kind of get its mojo back? How do we take that good news and do something positive?
Sure. I mean, I think to a certain extent, if we were to sort of look at the risks around this and the uncertainties, I guess the risk and uncertainty is that, the adjustments that need to happen have not quite happened yet. I think that's the big concern. To answer your question, and unfortunately, this does kind of bring us on to some of the big ticket issues. I think, businesses are desperate for some certainty and stability around policy. And I'm going to steal everybody's thunder now if I'm not careful. But whether this is the Marks and Spencer's decision, which I personally, not an LPA view, I think was a disgrace, or it's the staircase dilemma that developers are being put into, or dare I say it, it's HS2, and whichever side of the argument you are on HS2, I'd say the government has achieved a policy miracle in cheesing, to use polite language, everybody off. I mean, they could not have engineered a worse policy outcome on HS2, whether you are for the scheme or against the scheme. And I think we've got to get to grips with some of these things. I think we've got other, not time bombs, but we've got big issues on energy, we've got big issues on business rates. And whilst on the one hand I'm saying we need stability and certainty from the next government, I would caveat it by saying in order to achieve that, we have got to confront the failure of the machinery of government. And we cannot go on living in a world in which we have one-size-fits-all policies from Whitehall and politicians who are remote from the actualities of delivering and doing business. And I will stop in a second. For all their faults, for all the faults of local government, and there are many, they are more transparent, they are easier to deal with, they are more accountable, they stick around for longer, and eventually they sort problems out. And we have got to have a repairing of the breach of the way the machinery of government works and a whole-scale devolution of powers and responsibilities, because this model is not going to work. And, if we think it's bad now, imagine when we get onto nuclear power station delivery. Imagine when we get onto, the net zero challenge, the housing needs. We've got to sort that out and then have a period of stability and certainty.
Thank you. I think that was an extraordinarily good, I was going to say outburst. So I didn't
clap if you want to.
I didn't want to stop you, but thank you. I think you've just set a really good context. Caroline,
well, I'm very
slightly unfairly now, because you are sat in Whitehall, and this kind of question of certainty, I think, is something that I hope you're going to pick up on. This kind of long-term strategic certainty, and your expertise, I think, is around public-private collaborations, and how do we, I suppose, what do those partnerships look like? In order, to deliver some of this much-needed infrastructure for cities to give that long-term stability. So maybe you could talk about. I know it's not the question that you've been asked, which is incredibly mean of me. But,
well, first of all, luckily I'm a civil servant. I'm not a politician, which maybe takes the heat off a little bit. But the machine of government question obviously is a stratospherically large question. But if we're here, so it's a conference about value in its many dimensions. And I think what we need more than anything at the moment is the ability to deliver much needed infrastructure and transformation. And So what's the state of the market now, and what trends can we see in the future? I think we have to remember that it takes decades, mainly decades, to deliver these large, complex infrastructure and transformation schemes. And undoubtedly, it's incredibly challenging. It's, as Tom well knows, it's a really gritty time. And I think what's relevant to what Alex has said, we've seen a significant shift in context. The delivery environment for these schemes has almost totally changed. So the rug's been pulled from under people, and I think we need to remember that. The private sector is definitely feeling the pain. I feel Tom's pain and Tom's colleagues' pain. But equally, the private sector, the public purse, and society's feeling the pain. The 2020s, it's an incredibly challenging era for public finances. The scale of the public debt servicing burden and the sensitivity to interest rate rises means that there are very real fiscal pressures. And there are calls for public spending across a realm of different areas. So it's not just cities and regen. There are massive calls for health and social care, for education, for defence, for welfare, and the list goes on. So I think when we're talking about people challenging delivery in these areas, I think we have to remember how fiendishly complicated it is to do these things, and what we've been through with Brexit, the pandemic, the war, and a series of economic shocks. It's not easy. But having done my doomsay a bit...
Yeah, I was going to say, come on, light this up. You know all that.
I'm good.
What are the answers?
So
all those silver bullets?
I am an optimist, and people still do seem to have the willingness and the appetite to collaborate. And I see it both across Whitehall and beyond, both in the public and the private sector. And I think that people do still have the appetite because where there's risk, there's opportunity. And ultimately, I think the key fundamentals are still there in a number of respects. And hopefully Tom is seeing this on the demand side. So what does this mean? So harking back to what you said about value and the Hippocratic Oath, what I do think, though, is that we do need this sort of collaboration that we need now to deliver value it's a particular mindset and also a set of behaviours. It's definitely a more strategic approach to projects than possibly we've seen before. And I think that means that where possible, we would advocate people getting really clear in their public-private collaborations about what the scale of the ambition is at the outset for any master plan scheme. And then getting very clear as well as to the definition of the outcomes that people want to deliver. So across economic, financial, environmental and societal dimensions. And so really clear in terms of how they're going to be measured, monitored and risk managed. I'm quite optimistic because I am seeing some really good dialogues across a range of areas. I think it does buoy you to see that there is now a general acceptance of the triple net proposition for schemes, so that they have to deliver economic and financial value, environmental value and social outcomes. So that's positive. Another key trend I think that's good is to see that people are now accepting that education and skills are a key strand of infrastructure that need to be there in the mix.
Can I put that to Becca?
Yeah.
Because rather than, I know I have all these written down questions, but they're all so boring. And you know, you're sort of laying the scene, if you like. You know, Alex has said, you know, we need that kind of devolution. We need those people who are working on the ground to actually think about these long-term solutions. They're the ones who are delivering. They're not changing their pace. They're not changing their mind. You're saying actually there's a whole load of things now that if you're delivering regeneration, if you're delivering for cities, you need to be thinking about. And I know that Manchester, if you're talking about public-private partnerships, is an exemplar. Becca, can you talk a little bit about, I suppose, the challenges and you know, if Caroline's being optimistic about all of those things, and to pick up on Alex's point earlier, you know, how are you doing it?
So, I mean, I think Manchester has changed significantly over the last few decades. I mean, it's all recognisable. And I would say that those public-private partnerships have underpinned everything that we've done in the city. We've got a range of great examples now. We're working with Far Eastern Consortium in Victoria North. That's going to deliver 15,000 new homes, but also a new Metrolink stop, new health facilities, a new sort of city river park. We've got Mayfield working with TFGM, LCR and Landsec. That's already delivered the first urban park in 100 years. But homes, commercial space and phase one's going to be coming forward. Our partnership with our JV partner, Manchester Life, has created a whole new neighbourhood in Ancoats and New Islington. We work with Bruntwood, for example, on the corridor, so that's life sciences and innovation, and that will be expanded through ID Manchester. And we've done all of that in partnership, and actually I recognise exactly what you've just said in terms of some of those strengths. So you have to start with a clear vision. And I often joke, but we've got strategic regeneration frameworks for most of the city, certainly the city centre, and increasingly now we're looking beyond the city centre. But those frameworks are just fundamental because they set that clear vision based on an analysis of the drivers, the opportunities, the challenges, and it provides that clear roadmap to what we expect as a city council, and it gives that sort of certainty of approach and that consistent approach to investment. And I think what's really important about those frameworks is that it demonstrates that place-based approach. So we're not doing it plot by plot. How do these places come together as neighbourhoods within the city? And I think that's what Manchester's got a really, really strong track record of doing, and I'm building on sort of 20, 30 years of that. I think we're really good at bringing partners together. So again, you touched on the partnership. So it's not just your developers and your investors, it's bringing other landowners in, government agencies, Greater Manchester, registered providers, universities, utilities, you know, having everyone clear about what we're trying to deliver, and then that pragmatic approach to negotiating some of the challenges. And, you know, we're all facing challenges, but it's that long-term view. As a city council, I think, you know, we're in a great position. We've got lots of land assets, so we always will use those to try and stimulate development, appropriate development. And I think, again, coming back to the sort of importance of a strategic plan, if you've got a clear narrative about why you want to do something and how you're going to deliver it, you're much better placed to lever in public sector money. And then I suppose another key role for local councils is to engage your communities and drive out some of that social value. So again, I absolutely agree with everything you've said in terms of the importance of skills. For me, going back to your point about what more do we need, before this role, excuse me, I was involved in negotiating the first devolution settlement. And what we've always made the case for is long-term certainty of funding, the ability to blend and align that funding to be able to deliver, you know, place-based approaches. And I get that it's really difficult when you've got a spending review period, and I get it's difficult when it's coming from different departments, but it has been exceptionally difficult, I think, over the last few years with, as you touched on, sort of the changes and the shifts in the policy and funding environment. And I guess all we can do as local authorities is hold fast to the overall vision, look at pragmatic ways of negotiating our way through, and work with partners to lever in what we can.
But this, you know, I hear the call, you know, I sit on the National Infrastructure Commission, it's like long-term strategic vision, make sure that you have a kind of a proper pot of money that goes with expectation and you stop, you know, things stop shifting. But things will inevitably shift. Things have been changed, you know, we are faced, as I said, with headwinds, gale force winds that none of us could have predicted. How do you, how do you keep that long-term vision but maintain a flexibility that allows all of these things that are pushing you in different directions to not take you off course? Or maybe you have to say, okay, we're off course.
So, but I think Manchester in particular, I think we've always been pretty good at working with governments of any colour, actually, because let's face it, the vast majority of people and politicians they want to see development, they want regeneration, they want social benefit. I think it has been particularly challenging over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, inevitably because there's been such a shift. But, you know, I think where we're quite pragmatic in looking at how we can align our ambitions with those of government and other partners and finding a way through. And there is that, you know, negotiation and compromise. But overall, I think in Manchester, you know, it's focusing on what we want to deliver, and there is a limit to compromise, because at the end of the day, people in sort of my kind of position with our teams, obviously, are making decisions that will have an impact on the city for decades and generations.
Yeah. And Tom, you, I am going to ask you a question, by the way. And Rajesh, I know as a politician, there's no way I'm not going to ask the exact question, so don't panic.
You may not answer it.
All of this, you know, all of the things that have been talked about, all of these things being thrown at you. How are you managing it? What are you doing? How are you innovating? How as an organisation who have, I think, Argent are really well known for their long-term visions, for kind of having a plan and sticking to it. What do you do when the rug is pulled?
Well, yeah. I mean, Alex and I were talking before we came on stage, and you know, the title of The State of the Market, and Alex suggested maybe it should be The Perilous State of the Market. But I think, you know, to your point at the start, it doesn't necessarily feel like that. And I think that's maybe one of the problems. You know, actually, for those of us who can remember the GFC in 2008, there was no avoiding it. You know, it was very obvious. It was quite short and sharp in some respects, I mean longer in other respects, but in terms of real estate. And so you had to adjust. I think from a Related Argent point of view, over the last 3 years, we've attracted over £1 billion of external investment into our projects. We have 2,000 homes almost under construction. You know, we're kind of really at the finishing ends of King's Cross and kind of moving into the starting points of Brent Cross Town, where we have 7 buildings under construction. But through all of that, you know, perhaps that doesn't actually tell the real story. And I think that's kind of the theme of what we're saying here. You know, there are challenges in the office market. Today's about valuation and values, but you know that valuation is very, very hard at the minute on offices. I think the real challenge though is in the statistics. You know, actually, you cannot ignore the statistics. I think the Home Builders Federation released a report this month that said if you look at the new starts on homes currently going, if we continue that trend today, and you know, I think it's very hard to see how things will materially shift back towards where they were, certainly in the kind of short to medium term, that by 2026 we'll be annually producing as a country less than 100,000 homes a year. That's from 210,000 in March this year, and against a government target of 300,000. That is a huge, huge disparity. And I think, you know, if that is right, you know, the report then, people then pick off that could result in the loss of 500,000 jobs. It could be the lowest level for 80 years. You know, and if you talk about value, what is it that people value, you know, other than family, and you know, what is it that people value more than homes? And if we cannot get housing right in this country, you know, we've sat in these rooms for 15, 20 years and talked about a housing crisis for at least 10. You know, we're going to need a new description of housing crisis in 3 years' time if we don't restart this machine and kind of get us at least back to where we were. Obviously, the target was to go again, you know, 50% more. And you know, I think most people in this room when they've heard that number over the last 5 years, unfortunately have sat there and thought, no chance. And I think what's actually happened is, over the last few years, kind of that challenge has had petrol poured on it in terms of the cost of construction, the cost of commodities, the cost of finance, pressures on value. I mean, you talk about demand. Yes, absolutely, there is demand there, and actually, we are. And when we kind of get going, there's no doubt the demand is there. But you have to ask the question: why is the demand there? Yeah. And the demand is there because actually the supply is falling down. And I think that is something that we have to lean into. And I think to Alex's points that we require stability. Regulation is a very important part. I'm actually an advocate of more regulation. But I think when regulation is announced, it has to come with clarity about transition arrangements. And I think actually, real estate, particularly in what we do, it's 3 times a political cycle, assuming you can have stable politics through the entire political cycle, which we know we haven't had. So I think that that's the challenge we face. But to Becca's point, the reason we've attracted such significant investment and the reason we've been able to keep going through that and actually, really exceeded some of our expectations in kind of the quantum of development we've been able to get off the ground is because we had a clear long-term place-making vision for the places we're creating, the city parts we're building, and a kind of very strong ESG story that goes with that because of the scale at which we're doing it.
So I think that, Rajesh, this sort of long-term, sustainability, long-term focus, Tom's picked up on the kind of, how much change there is. One of the questions, I'm not going to come to it, but how do we achieve stability when government's focus is shorter term with 15 housing ministers since 2010 and 5 in the last 12 months? I mean, it is a question that keeps coming up. I'm not going to ask that for now. Because Rajesh, I want to kind of ask in terms of the City of London, how do you manage the long term? How do you manage, particularly, I think we've talked a lot about the economic wins, but the shifts in societal trends, they're kind of coming at us in a way that I think we can predict perhaps a bit better than we can the economic cycles.
Fantastic. First of all, it's great to be here. It's absolutely
great to
fun.
have you here.
It's normally my colleagues, Jules Pipers, Deputy Mayor for Planning and Regeneration, and my colleague.
I saw him last night. He was really peeved. He was really peeved that he wasn't invited. And I'm like, well,
So I'm Rajesh Agrawal, Deputy Mayor of London for Business. I'm also the chair of London and Partners, which is the London's trade investment and tourism promotion agency. So as such, I'm also dubbed as the traveling salesman for London. So I travel around the world trying to bring foreign investment in London. So I speak to a lot of international investors. And I was very enthused by Alex's comments at the start of the discussion.
Yeah, me too. I nearly clapped, but I thought that was inappropriate.
Of all the news, and I see this day in, day out, right? I mean, it's... London's got so much going for it at the moment. The numbers are looking amazing. I mean, this summer we had record numbers of people going to cinema, record number of people going to theaters, record number of people attending live music events. The tourism numbers are back big time. The number of flights booked for London have already gone higher than the pre-pandemic levels. So from an economic point of view, I'm sort of quite chuffed in that sense. But it doesn't take away the fact that the last few years for the economy and for businesses have been very challenging. And as an entrepreneur by background myself, I feel quite, businesses have been in very, very sort of tough place, whether it's sort of Brexit, which has then caused issues with supply chain, workforce, which is now impacting the delivery of housing targets and construction industry and all that, the biggest pandemic in 100 years. And now with the inflation, which again creates a lot of challenges for businesses, rise in interest rates, which is going to have a big impact on the real estate industry. All of that is hugely, hugely challenging, and that's why the mayor is working on sort of giving it a sort of bigger boost. So we have asked the government for £2.2 billion additional investment on housing to be able to deliver on the housing targets. But the point that has been made repeatedly by different panelists is around the stability and consistency. When I speak to investors around the world, they say two things. One is they like certainty, which they are not getting. I've been deputy mayor now for 7 years. We've seen how many, I've lost count now, I think 5 prime ministers and number of chancellors, numbers of business secretaries and so on. It's very tough. The political instability is not good for investment, and we need more sort of certainty around it. And second is around the talent piece. We need huge amount of sort of talent in London and investment in infrastructure. The message around HS2 recently is absolutely terrible. And, the mayor of London, the mayor of Manchester, the mayor of Birmingham, we all sort of on the same page on this. We've got to invest in our infrastructure. We've got to connect London to the north of England properly, not half-baked, but we need to do this properly. And businesses plan around all that. So that is hugely important. Now, one of the things which, as an entrepreneur is very frustrating when you see the red tape in the government. I mean, I never worked for a very large corporate, and then here I am working with the government, the biggest corporate of all that there is. So one of the things that we have done, recently launched, and I'm very excited about it, is our initiative called Opportunity London, which is essentially bringing the public and private sector together and making it easier for the investors from around the world to navigate through the market. Because London's not just one city, it's 33 local authorities in London. And for a overseas investor, it can be quite daunting to invest in London, quite complex, frankly. So we need to cut the red tape. We need to provide them with soft landing, sort of concierge service, as it were, and help them invest into London, because this sector also has got a very important role to play in the mayor's ambition for net zero for London by 2030. The mayor's ambition is to make London net zero and double the size of London's green economy to £100 billion by 2030. It cannot be delivered without this sector joining hands and actually doing things. And that's why the mayor has launched the Green Finance Fund as well, which is about £500 million, which has been made available to the public sector organizations. So look, I mean, it is no doubt a hugely challenging environment, but that's why, we are there standing shoulder to shoulder with your sector and with businesses to make things better and make the most of it.
So may I just raise one point, or respond to one point that people have repeatedly made about certainty? So very much feel and understand and share the feeling about wanting more certainty. And the current administration is very focused on delivery. But I think we have to be realists, because we are heading into the next general election, which will happen by January 2025. So I think we have to recognise that at the moment the only certainty there seems to be is change itself. So to a degree, we have to adapt our delivery and funding mechanisms to be resilient to the change which at levels is invariably going to keep going for a while. And I know that's easy in theory, but harder in practice. But I think we have to be realists.
Yeah, and I think Alex, I'll bring you in. But there's this point, isn't there? The minute there's an election, everything seems to slow down and stop. Well, not stop, but everyone's kind of waiting. How do we stop that waiting game? I know that wasn't the question you necessarily wanted to come in on, but how do we make sure that we're moving forward in parallel? We're not losing our nerve.
Sure. No, and I think Caroline makes a very valid point, and those of us who are in favour of more stability and certainty are not saying we should get rid of the electoral cycle. Although, interestingly, the government did choose to get rid of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which did give us some certainty about when elections are to be called. And I just want to add, by the way, I think it's brilliant Caroline's here, because my opening line at these events is always, is there anybody from the Treasury in the audience? And there never is. So to have somebody from the Treasury to come on the panel, I think is excellent, because it means we're having a bit more of a conversation with others rather than just ourselves. But to answer the question fundamentally, the way I think we deal with that problem is this idea of allowing other bits of government, regional and local government, to get on with things because they're not affected in the same way by the general election cycle. So I think this idea of having stronger regional and local government is a way of dealing with the ebbs and flows that happen nationally. The thing I wanted to, if I may, just to pick up on was Tom's point about housing. There was a really excellent piece of work done by Centre for Cities earlier this year for the EC bid. Other bids, as the Radio Times would say, are available. And one of the things it was looking at was the extent to which we now have a productivity problem, which is actually goes back to the financial crisis. And productivity per head in London used to be growing at sort of 2 to 3% per annum. It's now growing at 0.1% per annum and has done so since 2008. And I thought really fascinatingly, one of the causes of that they identify is the lack of housing. And this isn't just affordable housing for people who are less well off or on lower incomes. This is affordable housing for people who are in their midlife careers, who are earning reasonably good salaries, who would otherwise have come to London from abroad and elsewhere, Manchester, but you know we can argue about that later. But they would have come to London.
No, if HSTs.
And the point is, they would have been working in some of the more productive sectors of the economy. So the more productive sectors of the economy, dare I say, including finance, would have been larger, as we see in other cities such as New York. And of course, part of the reason we haven't built the housing is because of the sort of problems that we now know about around targets, which government is very nervous about. But of course, the related point is the infrastructure available to provide the means by which the housing is delivered. And I commend the GLA and the government for looking to do what they're planning to do, I think, towards the east of London, the DLR 2.0. Alex Williams has talked about this to do that. But if we had our Crossrail 2s going on and all the rest of it, we would have this programme, if we'd stop Crossrail 1, Elizabeth Line, and move those people with all their experience into their next line, it would help manage cost and risk, provided the certainty we're talking about, and a narrative for growth. So all these things are kind of connected, and that's why I think it's so important to focus on things which shouldn't really be that political. And the final thing I'll say, is this. Cities like London and Manchester and Liverpool and Birmingham and Leeds want growth, right? They want more people to come and live in their cities. They want to be engines of prosperity and all the rest of it. So why not allow those areas to take the growth, give them the money to develop the infrastructure to allow them to take the growth? And as I said last year, all of those who live in the Shires can turn over and go back to sleep because we'll take the growth, we'll produce the economic output here, and the rest of the country will not be then confronted with the same development pressures. But to have this sort of situation, a bit of sort of paralysis around these things, I just think is potentially very damaging.
So Becca, do you want it all?
Yes, of course we do. But actually, I was just going to say, well, we've had some very similar analysis on Manchester, actually. So the Resolution Foundation, as part of their Economy 2030 series, have made similar findings to those, which essentially housing is a huge drag on productivity for Manchester, partly because we can't attract and retain the skilled workforce that we need to support our key growth sectors. So cities everywhere are facing that challenge, and I know we've touched on HS2 several times already in this panel. I'm sure it's going to be a feature of the day, but it is also the infrastructure within city regions as well as between them that is absolutely fundamental, because I obviously focus on the city of Manchester, but I've worked for Greater Manchester and other parts of Greater Manchester before, but we function as a geographical area in a similar, or we should be starting to function in a similar way to Greater London. And there is lots and lots of potential for development in the city of Manchester and across Greater Manchester, but the lack of appropriate transport infrastructure is a fundamental blocker on that.
I will come to you, Tom. I'm very conscious that I'm going to ask some questions that the audience have given. One of them, I'm not suggesting, I know you want to come in on this, but one of them is around getting us back to the kind of carbon question. And it says, and this is from Kerr Gilchrist, and it says, how do we create performance through regen while local authorities want to increase carbon tariffs fivefold, which seems to be at odds with GLA guidelines? I don't know. There's another one, which is anonymous, saying, today the FT reported that Facebook have pulled out of a 1 million square foot office, mostly in London and Dublin, ... Is this a one-off or a sign of the times ahead? Question mark. I'm going to leave those and
well,
if
I can tailor an answer that kind of touches those.
Tom, please come in on Beck's point, and then I'll.
Well, I mean, I was going to go back to what you said at the very start about do no harm before you do good.
Yeah.
And maybe change that to stop the bleeding before you then think about And I think if you really stand back and look at some of the policies that we have, they were created in a completely different world. In the mid-teens, where interest rates were historic low and had been for some time, and no one could see any other position other than remaining there forever, some policies were set. And I think that we have to make some very swift adjustments to stop the bleeding before we can then actually really strategically look longer term. And I think no more so is that evident than in the rental sector. The rental sector has policies against private landlords on tax, which were designed around 1.5% interest rates and are not suitable for a 7% interest rate environment on buy-to-let mortgages. And the LSE said that 40% less homes to rent in London now than since the pandemic. A JLL report last month said that in Bristol, 14% drop in stock in Q2 alone this year. Now, that sounds astonishing, but even if that's 50% right, that is, and at the same time, this conversation about these cities wanting to drive growth, and Bristol's doing quite a good job at that, and actually has a 10% increase in population since the pandemic. So, I think these things are at odds with each other, and I think actually, you talk about how those dealt with. I think there is just a kind of, I take the point around local government sort of having a longer view than the kind of central government, but actually there's just a mismatch of ideology sometimes, it seems. I think the idea of dealing with the landlord issue by dropping the environmental regulation requirements just seems completely bonkers. And I think in the world that we're in, actually there should be tax incentives, not relaxation of environmental regulations. That's the last thing we need. We need more environmental regulations. So I think you've got to kind of put those, and the point around the question around carbon, that we have to do more regulation, but with transparency, clarity, and a long-term vision. But we have to make some changes in the short term to kind of get us back on track, because this is going to escalate. Less houses being delivered, less houses available for rent, and kind of a cost of living crisis on impacting everyone. And I think it's a real challenge.
Kind of the stop the bleeding is, we're seeing this kind of massive rowing back on green policies, on our kind of rate. Yeah, and I thought,
I'd like to say
I'm going to ask. I'm just going to bring Rajesh in, and then Caroline, I'll come back to you, because this is touching on some of the questions here.
Yeah.
How are you responding in the GLA to this? You see national government moving backwards. Does that just make you want to move faster forward, or are you? I mean, how's that reflecting your kind of long-term policies?
So first of all, on green policies, I think it's disappointing to see the national government sort of policies sort of rolling back on green stuff, because first of all, we are in a climate emergency, and it's not the right thing to do. But secondly, I think that's not where the British public or British businesses is as well. Businesses understand the importance of environment and getting it right. So I think it's completely sort of misstep, but also is out of step with businesses in a lot of ways. The other point is, I think we need to start thinking, and most politicians don't think sort of beyond the election cycle. I think it's quite important when we talk about long-term infrastructure planning that we think beyond the electoral cycles and think more sort of longer term, and that's hugely important to do that. Projects that takes longer to deliver, but they are important. And also infrastructure is not a one-off that you invest, you do one project and that's it, sit on it for 10 years. It doesn't work like that. You got to constantly invest, keep, we are competing with the new world economies like India and China, who are sort of building infrastructure at some extraordinary pace. And here we are still debating a lot of, things that we've been debating for decades. And it's, we can't compete in the sort of global world on that. And I want to just finally pick up on the question around sort of structural changes around the sort of office. I mean, I live in outer London, and London's the economic engine of this country. Within that, central London is the absolute heart of it. But equally, London's not just zone 1. London's got the outer London as well, which plays a very important role. And post-pandemic, we have seen there's more spending in outer London as people sort of work from home, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and so on. But it also means that this remote working has massively accelerated in post-pandemic, and that will have an impact. But we are seeing London continues to be a huge destination for companies from around the world to set up. I mean, last year we see a record number of VC investment coming in our tech sector, the record number of investment coming in our life sciences sector. When I travel to America, I say London is like New York, Washington, D.C., Boston, Los Angeles, and San Francisco all in one place. Because New York, like the financial capital of the world, Washington, D.C. is the political capital, Boston is the life sciences capital, San Francisco is on the sort of tech side, and Los Angeles our creative economy.
Yeah. Oh, Alex, I will bring you in, but Caroline, you smarted.
Just briefly,
you smarted at me.
Just briefly. So I'm a built environment expert, working 30 years in the private sector before I came into Whitehall. So I do hopefully speak two vernaculars a little bit. But with the green agenda and people's concerns over the shift, obviously I'm not a politician, but I just wanted to reassure people that, that the government today is very focused on achieving, meeting the Carbon Budget 6 requirements, and there's an inordinate amount of work going into looking at energy transition and security, and focused on a whole stream of work streams. So it's about renewables, it's new nuclear, it's about retrofitting all our outdated housing stock, it's carbon capture, usage and storage. So there's an inordinate amount of work going on, and it's not easy, and especially on the implementation, delivery and funding side, and the challenge is very much a joint public and private sector endeavour. But I think just the point I wanted to make is that I think it would be a mistake to overplay the politics of the day, because it's also about the private sector and a societal shift. So can we think about that when we later on in the day look for solutions?
So we've got a few minutes left. I had one question that I'm going to ask you all, and I have primed you, which is you've written your letter to the PM. What's your PS? But before that, I have one. I have actually been reading the questions, and they are pretty much being integrated into the conversation. But what linchpin policy would you like to see put in place by the government to bolster the real estate sector? That's a one-liner from you all before you give me your PSs, please. I don't know who wants to kick off with that one. Which linchpin policy? It's from an anonymous person in the audience. Yeah.
So I'll sort of use that to say what I wanted to say, but. I think the linchpin...
He is the next politician.
Oh, God, no, please, no. The linchpin policy I would put in place is devolving the local tax base, so the property tax base, to local authorities. You'd still have to have some mechanisms to transfer out of London and the rest of it, because it's disproportionately big in the equation. And the reason I say that is because of something Tom said earlier about tax incentives in the context of buy-to-let and the rest of it. In New York, as we speak, the city government and the state government are panicking. And they're panicking because about 30–40% of their tax base is at risk from falling assessment values, falling rateable values for the real estate offices in Manhattan in particular, but the other boroughs. And so what they're doing is they're looking at all their policies, Local Law 19, I think it is, on environmental compliance and the rest of it. And they're looking at mechanisms by which they can incentivize property owners to invest in their properties, to make them more environmentally friendly, to raise the assessment values, to secure the city's income to spend on all the things that are important to the citizens of New York. We have no such mechanism in Britain. In the 1900s, 98% of local government income came from rates, business rates and other rates. By the 2000s, it was about 5 pence. If you don't connect the Facebook decision, you know, to the financial health and wealth of, in this case, Camden, I think, how can you expect local government and developers to find mechanisms? I mean, the Facebook decision will have zero impact on Camden's income. And that's not Camden's fault, but surely we should live in a world in which we reconnect those things, because it will create incentives for development and drive the partnership behaviour that Caroline's talked about. And we know this works because we know that Crossrail, even though it overran a bit, got built. And part of the reason Crossrail got built was because 2/3 of Crossrail's finance was paid for not by the government but by London. Yeah. By London businesses through taxes and through the fare box. And that makes those schemes harder to cancel. And that's why we've got to have this partnership approach to deal with the infrastructure problem.
Okay. I'm going to now ask you all in 45 seconds to, what's your PS? No, I think you've probably answered well enough for your fellow colleagues in terms of the policy shift. Caroline.
Oh, just the PS, right. So the PS...
Oh, no, you can do both if you're quick. If everybody's quick.
No, because... So I think in terms of change, I'd want an increased, well, more holistic approaches and enhanced cross-Whitehall working. So individual departments are increasingly looking up and outwards. Yeah. But I think we're seeing good direction of travel there. But in terms of my PS to Rishi, I can't do an American accent, but I think it would be...
Oh, go on, try.
No. I did work in Manhattan for a while, but I think it would be somewhat like keep trucking.
I think mine would be to say that a healthy real estate sector is essential to growth and economic prosperity. And please remember that healthy real estate takes at least twice as long as a political cycle to deliver. So you have to think long term.
Yeah, thank you. Good. PS.
I think I've done my PS. We love you really, that's my PS.
Despite where we are today, it's not all about the built environment. Raising the local housing allowance in line with inflation would have a massive impact on affordability.
And your PS? Oh, is that your PS?
That is my PS.
Oh, that is your PS and your policy and everything all in one. Last but not least.
Do I only have to do one?
No,
I mean, I've got a long list.
No, okay, let's do a short list.
I mean, devolution is one big thing. HS2, I think, is very important to connect London to the rest of sort of north of England. Immigration, I think, is very important. Number one reason why investors invest in London is because the amazing talent that it has. So we've got to make sure we keep attracting and retaining talent in London.
Fantastic. And your PS? I know you told me one that I can't repeat.
Yeah,
so not,
not one for the stage.
I'll let you off that. What an amazing discussion. We're 1 minute behind, sorry, but I think we started a little bit late. Long-term visions, long-term strategies, long-term certainty. I think when we look to what we believe and think and understand as value, today is going to be such an interesting day. I hope very much that the discussion that we've had today has set a really interesting, I think it has fascinating context for the solution-driven, I'm told, the solution-driven conversations that we are to be had. We have an incredible audience. We have amazing minds, enthusiasm, a love of London, not obviously the Shires.
No, we love the Shires.
I know we love the Shires. We'll leave them in. we'll allow them to relax where they are. I just want to say that we are, this is about partnership. We've talked about collaboration. We have great minds, we have great enthusiasm. Let's really try and use today to kind of think about what we mean by value. What are the things that we need to put in place, those policies, those asks, that we have as a community, as a built environment community, and how we can try to look forward to improve people's quality of life through the work that we do and to really add value and not just monetary. I would like to give a huge, huge thanks to the esteemed panel. I did offer to introduce all the audience earlier, which was clearly my mistake. I'm going to go and learn some Latin so that I can actually read out my notes, which says do no harm. But I think we have certainly looked to not do harm, but think very hard about how we do something that's incredibly positive and wonderful for our city. So thank you so much.